Today we learn about the origins of former WCW professional wrestler Sting. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss The Crow. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair is our own harbinger of horror. Please welcome James Brooks.
Hello again, everybody. I'm so glad to be back on the show as always. I've enjoyed the last couple episodes of Moving Panels. I've actually caught up for once on the podcast. I've fallen behind on mine, though.
That is awesome. Of course, James is the host of another podcast, Interview with a Horror Virgin. And so check that one out.
Yes, new episodes are coming soon. I had a bit of a personal thing going on, but next episode's coming out soon, hopefully next month. I've got them all edited. I just need to set them up to be ready to go on podcasts and all that stuff.
Yeah, podcasting is not as easy as I think some people think.
No.
Not if you want to try to make it good. But here we are. We are going to discuss The Crow. And you might be thinking, why are you discussing a movie like The Crow in the middle of summer? Well, that's because the remake is coming out. I actually think it is going to be released right before this episode will drop. But we've got the new one coming out with Bill Skarsgård taking on the role of The Crow. And so I just thought, you know what? Let's go back and relive the original. And so let's talk about The Crow. The Crow was released, and people who say summer, The Crow was released in May 13th of 1994. It was directed by Australian filmmaker Alex Proyas. If you think you know that name, you're probably a fan of cult classic movies from the 90s, like The Crow, because he's also the director of Dark City.
I don't think I ever saw Dark City.
That's a weird one, I will say that. But he did direct some bigger movies like I, Robot. He directed the Nicolas Cage movie Knowing. And he directed the box office flop that was Gods of Egypt.
No, really? Oh, what
Yes.
a shame. What a shame. That film was weird in itself, and I saw it too. I was like, I don't even know what the plot of this movie is supposed to be about.
Yeah, I saw it once and I don't remember anything. I saw Knowing once.
I couldn't finish it.
I was good. I was good. All right. The movie was written by David Shaw, or Shachow, however you pronounce his last name, and John Shirley. I wanted to bring this up because I thought James would like this. So David Shaw, who wrote this movie, also wrote Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
Beautiful.
And he wrote Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The New Beginning, I think is what that one was called. He also wrote, speaking of sequels, horror movie sequels, he wrote Critters 3 and Critters 4.
And fun little fact, I think Leonardo DiCaprio got his acting debut in Critters 3 as one of like the young teen actors there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then John Shirley is a horror novelist. So he's more known for writing horror books than he is for writing scripts. However, he did write, I wanted to mention this because he's done some comic book related stuff. He did write episodes for the television cartoon Defenders of the Earth. He wrote for The Real Ghostbusters. He wrote for HBO's Todd McFarlane's Spawn.
Beautiful. And
he wrote for Batman Beyond. So wanted to mention all of that. Shirley also in 2012 would actually write a 5-issue series of The Crow titled Death and Rebirth. So he did one of the more modern takes on The Crow. But the comic book was created by James O'Barr. For those of you who don't know this is actually something that I did not know until very recently. That O'Barr actually wrote this comic as a way for him to deal with the death of his fiancée, who was killed in a car accident due to a drunk driver.
Interesting way of coping, I will say. I mean, we all cope differently, but after reading the comic itself, he must have been going to some dark places.
Yeah, absolutely. The actual Crow run is not actually that long. It was only 4 issues. There was a 5th issue that went unpublished until the whole thing was put together in graphic novel form. But it was only 4 issues. Each of the issues was titled by like one of the stages of grief because I think one's titled Fear, one's titled Anger, one's titled Pain, something like that. I didn't write down the 4, but yeah, but these were released February through May of 1989, and became one of those underground sensations around that time, because this was right when those independent underground comics, because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had hit it big right here at the end of the 80s. And then here we have The Crow as well, another independent comic that people were talking about. When O'Barr started going to movie studios, the first movie studio, which I couldn't find out what movie studio it was, but the first movie studio that O'Barr dealt with wanted to make this into a musical.
Okay. How would you make The Crow into a musical?
I don't know. And better yet, they wanted Michael Jackson to be the Crow.
Oh my God.
He then pitched it around to New Line Cinema, eventually over to Paramount, who is the one who started making the movie. But then after the accident that we will get into that occurred during this movie, Paramount decided they didn't want to move forward with it. And eventually it went to Miramax, which, again, that's a lot of the great classic 90s, cult movies typically come from Miramax. So it went to Miramax, was released, again, full circle back around May 13th of 1994. So let's go ahead and get into this, and let's talk about the characters, and we're gonna discuss it. But let's go ahead and talk about Eric Draven. He is the Crow, here played by Brandon Lee in his final performance. I will mention that River Phoenix and Christian Slater were considered. In fact, Christian Slater was apparently the one that most of the filmmakers wanted to play the Crow. I don't know about that. River Phoenix, maybe.
Yeah.
Christian Slater, I don't know.
I don't know. He just has too much of a baby face for this type of film. Even though he was of age, but still I can just see him in his younger days of the films that he did. But seeing him as the Crow, I don't think would have worked. As much as the directors would have wanted him to, I just associate him with too much of his younger career.
Yeah, I don't think it would have worked. But of course, Brandon Lee, for those of you who don't know, is the son of legendary martial artist Bruce Lee. And in fact, Brandon would help choreograph this movie and choreograph many of the action scenes. He would work alongside his close friend Jeff Imada. For those of you who know about stunt work and fight choreography, Jeff Imada has done a whole lot in the business. And just to point this one out, because to me, this shows how great of a fight coordinator he is. He was the primary fight coordinator on all of the Bourne movies.
Interesting. It's been a while since I've seen the Bourne movies, but I will admit that was the one thing that did keep me involved with the Bourne movies, even though I didn't really finish them. I think I didn't finish the last film, but that's kind of interesting because now I can see why everything in the Bourne films with action is the way it is. More thought out instead of just here, let me punch you.
But I think, too, it helps that Brandon Lee was a trained fighter, because you're not going to get that out of River Phoenix or Christian Slater. But you get that out of Brandon Lee. So the way he can move his body. I mean, that was one of the great things about his father, was just how well his body just flowed. And he made things look like a dance. And I think that showed here with Brandon Lee as well.
Yeah, because I forgot what the film he was in prior to The Crow. I want to say it was not like a copycat, but it almost felt like a Steven Seagal type film. Whereas compared to Steven Seagal, watching Brandon Lee in this felt more natural for him and realistic.
Yeah, Brandon Lee never really... I think this was going to be probably his biggest breakout movie, because before this, he really appeared in a lot of stuff that people didn't see.
Yeah.
I mean, he did Rapid Fire. Rapid Fire was the one right before this. I don't know if that's the one you're talking about.
That's probably it.
Rapid Fire. He did Showdown in Little Tokyo. Well, I mean, he was in... His very first thing was in Kung Fu the movie. But yeah, I think this was going to be his big breakout role. And unfortunately, the filming of this movie, unfortunately, due to an accident, saw the death of Brandon Lee. And so I do want to take a moment, because I don't want to leave that hanging. And let's go ahead and talk about this horrible tragedy that happened. So on March 31st of 1993, while filming the murder of Eric and Shelley, Brandon Lee was accidentally shot in the abdomen. It was actor Michael Massey, who plays Funboy in the movie. Michael Massey has gone on to say that this incident has haunted him. He actually took a break from acting for a year after The Crow, filming The Crow because of this, but he says to this day, he thinks about this moment. Of course, it was entirely an accident. There was no blame on Michael Massey whatsoever. What happened, for those of you who don't know, what happened was 2 weeks prior to filming this scene, the gun that was used in another shot where they wanted a closer up shot of the gun. And when they do that, they do actually use bullets because it makes it look more realistic. You actually can, because you want to see the projectile coming out of the gun. But they take away the powder so that there's no, explosion to it, really. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was the gun was fired by someone who, from what I gathered, should not have been handling the gun. The gun was fired and it caused the bullet to get lodged in the barrel. That's known as a squib load. So the bullet is actually inside the barrel. And unfortunately, no one noticed this. Say what you will, the armorer I had heard had been let go, and it was some sort of PA or assistant director of some sort who was handling the weapons, and they did not fully check the gun. They didn't look down the barrel and see that this bullet was, in fact, lodged inside the barrel. They then loaded it with blanks, because that's what they were going to use in this scene with Eric and Shelley, because they were going to fire the gun at an actor. So you use the blanks, which of course just cause the flash, but there's no projectile. Unfortunately, because there was a bullet in the barrel, the blank gave the exact same force and push to that bullet as if the bullet was fired by the gun itself. And that, unfortunately, that abdomen shot that happened resulted in the death of Brandon Lee. I'll stop there and I'll talk about what happened afterwards. Do you have anything you want to say, James?
I was just gonna add to it, like, if anyone else wants a really good example of like how it actually happened, I recommend going to, if anyone's subscribed to Shudder, they have a series there called Cursed Films, and The Crow is one of the the movies that they do talk about, because in that day and age, everything that was happening with The Crow, from pyrotechs, electronics, a lot of accidents did happen on set, and they do consider it to be a cursed film. They actually go through the whole process, like Laramy said, on how it actually happened. A man loads the gun, he has a piece of plywood, he shoots the first blank, but he doesn't clean it, and he shows exactly what it looks like in the barrel, and he puts the next blank in and says, now you have a live round. He shot, and he shows the example what happened to the plywood, and kind of put two and two together. That's what happened to Brandon Lee. It wasn't a conspiracy like everyone wants to keep thinking. No.
Yeah.
Because everyone was like saying, the reason this happened is the Chinese mafia got mad at Bruce Lee for showing off kung fu secrets, and it followed his son. But it was an accident, plain and simple.
And there's also the myth of it happened in the scene where he's on top of the table and everybody's shooting at him. That's not the scene it happened in. He's not the Crow when he is shot. He is Eric Draven. This is when they were filming the murder of Eric Draven and Shelley. There's also the myth that they used that shot in the movie. They did not. I mean, the fact that someone would even think that they would use that shot in the movie, it's just horrible. I don't care what budget you're under, what time constraint you're under. You do not put that shot in the movie. But of course, they did have to consider what were they going to do. Luckily, I say, that with the, whatever, but Brandon Lee had filmed the majority of the movie at that point. He only had 3 days of shooting left. They were really shooting the flashback scenes. Was about all they had left.
I was going to say, but from what I heard from the documentary, the scenes where he doesn't say anything, they say that's the person they had to use to replace Brandon to get those final shots.
Yeah, so they used his stunt double, Chad Stileski, who filled in obviously stunt double, so he's got the same body build. He's got roughly the same look. But they did use some computer graphics in order to impose Brandon Lee's face on top of his, so that if there was ever a clear shot, it would still look like Brandon Lee. But like you said, he couldn't do a lot of movement because this is 1994. You don't have really great computer graphics abilities at this time just yet. So, but yes, they did finish the film. Think whatever you want to think about that, whether that was respectful or not respectful. It's not the only time something like this has happened, where an actor has died during a production and how they had to handle it. Of course, this is a special circumstance where it is actually in the making of the movie that your main actor is killed. But I wanted to go ahead and knock that out and talk about that, so that wasn't left hanging as something people were waiting for us to talk about. Just wanted to go ahead and get that out of the way and then move forward talking about the rest of the movie. But James, you got anything left you want to say?
I was just going to add on to another example of an actor dying in the middle of set would have to be Vic Morrow from the Twilight Zone movie. That was pretty much I was going to add. And this was, really, really bad accident that happened on there.
Yeah. And it also, I can't remember the actor's name, but it also happened during the filming of Gladiator. One of the actors passed away.
I'm trying to remember his name, but
yeah, I can't remember his name. But they had to do pretty much the same thing. They used a stand-in and then CGI'd his face on top for that. But let's go ahead and move on to our other characters. Again, Brandon Lee is great as the Crow. Bill Skarsgård is going to have some big shoes to fill, in my opinion. This really was, I think, Brandon Lee's role, and it would have been a breakout role for him. And I would have loved to have seen him turn this into, I know it turned into a franchise, but I would have liked to have seen it turn into a franchise with Brandon Lee.
Absolutely.
I really would have.
And also, not to forget, since this is going to tie into some horror film stuff right here, Michael Berryman, for those of us that are probably fans of Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes, he was going to be a character in the movie The Skull Cowboy, but I have no idea why that's got scrapped. That was such a shame.
Yeah, I think the Skull Cowboy, so for those of you who don't know, we'll get into a little bit of the moving panels right here. The Skull Cowboy is a character in the book. He's kind of the spirit guide for the Crow. He's the one who lets the Crow know, hey, you're not done. It's not your time yet. It's not your time to board this train, I think is how it starts off.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he's the one that tells Eric that it is time. And then there's this horse involved, and there's a horse that Eric sees at the beginning tangled up in barbed wire, and then at the end it's a dream horse, and he has to shoot it, and then it becomes his ghost horse for him to ride. I will say that part was confusing, so I can see why they got rid of all that stuff, and then the stuff with the Skull Cowboy.
The practical effects are amazing, though, for Michael Berryman. He's a great
they did
actor.
film it. They did film it, so it just was not put into the movie. All right, let's move on to the other characters. I will say, probably our next kind of main character, who is roughly our narrator of this story, is Sarah, played by Rochelle Davis. Now, the character there is this character in the comic, but in the comic, her name is Sherry. And I think they changed the name because Opar wasn't real great with thinking of names. So he's got a Sherry, a Shelley, and then later there's a character named Shelby in the comic. And so I think they changed the name from Sherry to Sarah so that you wouldn't get that confusion with Shelley, Eric's fiance. But in the comic book, this character, I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the movie. In the comic book, the Crow does not meet her until about halfway through the story. So she did not know Eric and Shelley prior to their murder. But other than that, she is pretty much the same character. She has the issues with her mom, and her mom being involved with Fun Boy. She does befriend the Crow. She calls him Clown Face, which they kind of reference in the movie when she says, "What are you supposed to be, a clown?"
Sometimes.
Yeah, he calls her Princess in the comic book. And he does give her Shelley's engagement ring. So that's consistent. Like I said, she's pretty much the same character. They just give her a little bit bigger of a part in the movie than in the comic book.
And she looks a little bit better too in the movie versus how in the comic she looks like this very trashy girl that's like sleeping on a mattress on the floor, very like, a poverty-stricken girl almost.
Yeah, they make her more of a kind of just girl who
rebel.
Who has learned how to live on the streets in the movie, which I like. Next up, we've got Sergeant Daryl Albrecht, played by the immortal Ernie Hudson. That man has not aged since 1984. Now, this character is from the comic. There is a Albrecht that is a police officer, but the Albrecht in the comic book is a rookie cop who meets up and sees the Crow for the first time after the explosion at the pawn shop. And the Crow confronts him, kind of befriends him very easily, and gets on his side. But in the comic, there's also another cop who is, and again, like I said, Obar. I keep saying Obar. Obar wasn't real great with names. The other cop is named Captain Hook in the comic.
I thought that was so funny.
He's the one that is actually investigating their murder. And so they kind of merge those together with Ernie Hudson's character. It is actually and kind of like in the movie where Albrecht is beside Shelley while she is in the hospital. They flip it the other way around in the comic book. Hook is actually with Eric in the hospital. It's Eric that goes to the hospital in the comic. And it is Captain Hook who, after Eric burns down him and Shelley's house, he leaves Hook a note asking him to take care of their cat, Gabriel, who we do see in the movie. We do see that in the movie.
And the final comic panel, too.
Yeah. So they merged those characters together. Hook and Albrecht got merged together to create Ernie Hudson's character. I can't think of any time that Ernie Hudson is bad in something. So
I can't either. I mean, I liked his role. Yeah. It was kind of humorous how they had a little bit of banter in the movie more than they do in the comic. Yeah. Because he shows up again in his apartment and he's just like, "Could you use the door?" Or, like, "Aren't you going to jump out the window again?"
Yeah. No, and see, that's another thing about Brandon Lee is so great as to the way he plays this character, which I absolutely love. Our main villain, Top Dollar, played by Michael Wincott. For those of you who recognize him, as I recognized him from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, he played Guy of Gisborne. He also played, more recently, he played Antlers Holst in Nope. But Top Dollar in the comic book is not the leader. He's not the main bad guy. He is just one of the thugs that was involved in the murder, and he is taken out by the Crow. It is actually T-Bird who is the leader of the group in the comic book. But they made it Top Dollar here. I don't know if it was just because of the name. Like, the name Top Dollar sounds more like a leader's name than T-Bird.
Too many T names, I will admit, from the comic to the movie.
Again, there's that. Because, there's 1010, and I think there was a
Tom, T-Bird, and then Fun Boy.
Yeah, Fun Boy, and then Skank. One of them's named Skank, too. But yeah, so what did you think of Top Dollar here? So very different character. They make this one, he's more of a gangster, like a kingpin, than he is just a thug like he was in the comic. And then they give him all of this where he's into mystic stuff and all that. What was your thoughts on this take of this villain?
I get it gave the movie more depth and it raised the stakes more than just Eric Draven going on this killing spree and just pretty much taking him out with no adversary that could go up against him. So in the comic, it was, the story of just revenge, just very cold-blooded revenge. Whereas in this, there's an opponent who's into the mysticism and knows of his power. Because we don't get that in the comics.
No. So, and of course, that leads into our other character, Micah, I forgot how you pronounced it, played by Bei Ling, who was shoved down our throats in the 90s and the early 2000s, in my opinion. She was in Crank High Voltage, and she was also in Wild Wild West, probably some movies people recognize her for. But this character was entirely created for the movie. She was created to be that mystic for Top Dollar, to be the one who figures things out about the Crow. That was really all she was there for. She was there for her introduction scene, for us to see her taking a shower. That was another reason she was there. I'm kind of already revealing which character I'm going to say I did not like in this movie. But what were your thoughts on that character?
There was really no depth to her. She was just kind of there as like, I almost want to say it was like a token character, because I was more interested in Top Dollar than I was her, because he talked the most. He seemed to guide the scene the most, and she was just kind of there in the background the entire time. Kind of like a semi-evil henchman over his shoulder character.
Yeah.
Especially with the death of Gideon's pawn shop, where they bring him in and she does nothing, and then here Top Dollar goes and just, shoves the sword right through his throat. And I'm like, okay, he's more interesting than she. She's just there to be like the wisdom and all that.
Yeah. Then we've got the other thugs or gangsters, whatever you want to call them. These are kind of throwaway parts, which they are in the comic book as well for the most part. Of course, T-Bird is the bigger bad in the comic. Here, he is one of the lesser characters. He's played by David Patrick Kelly, who famously was the big antagonist Luther in another cult classic movie, The Warriors. Then we've got Skank, played by Angel David. I couldn't really find anything more on that actor. 1010, played by Lawrence Mason, who would later appear in Hackers. He would be on the show Prison Break. He was in The Lincoln Lawyer. We got Fun Boy, as we talked about earlier, played by Michael Massey, who never got to... I've talked about this before on this podcast. He played the gentleman that was in both of the end credit moments of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies. He was the gentleman, the guy who was forming the Sinister Six that we never got.
Oh, God, I have to actually go back and catch that, because I think he was also in another horror film. I could be wrong. He was, I think, one of the cops in Tales from the Hood.
Yes, he was. He was.
The one that got put into the wall. That was my favorite scene.
Yep.
I loved that.
Yep. No, he was that as well. I also knew him from the first season of 24. He played Ira Gaines in that. Then we've got two very big, probably the bigger names other than Ernie Hudson that were in this, but playing very small parts. We got Grange, played by the Candyman himself, Tony Todd.
Yep.
In an extremely just random bit part. This is another character that is not in the comic. So I don't know what the point of creating him is, other than you were able to get Tony Todd, and let's find a role for Tony Todd in this movie.
I have to agree with that. I think this was during his those failed Candyman movies, the Farewell to the Flesh and Day of the Dead, and maybe he was wanting something a little bit more not typecast, but I feel like it's just a very throwaway character. He's just Tony Todd playing Tony Todd.
Yeah, but then in just a few years after that, he would be the mortician in the Final Destination movies.
That was a cool role, though.
All right, and then finally, we've got Gideon, the pawn shop owner, played by character actor John Polito, who, I mean, look, he was in The Rocketeer, which I had to mention because it's another comic book movie. He's in The Big Lebowski. It's probably what some people remember him from. But he is one of those actors who, he's just one of those, hey, it's that guy. I've seen that guy in something before.
Like Dick Miller.
And because he's appeared in so many TV shows, he's appeared in so many movies and little bit parts. He is one of those actors that you just immediately go, hey, it's that guy.
I love it.
All right. Now, I think we've talked about all the characters that are worth talking about. All the others are kind of small bit parts. So let's go ahead and ask the question, James. Of all of these characters, who do you want to see again? And who do you wish would be duct taped to a car that explodes while launching into the water?
Oh, man. I would like to see... I would like to see Fun Boy's character kind of go out like he did in the comic versus how he did in the movie.
Yeah. No, we're going to talk about the comparisons. And the deaths.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine for you to mention that, but just to let you know, we'll get into detail about that. But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, Fun Boy definitely has a bigger part in the comic.
So you mean like what we want to see, like versus the remake type thing, where we want to see?
Well, no. Just like it. Would you have liked to have seen one of these characters? Like you're even thinking. Like, would you like to seen one maybe evolved a little bit more, maybe used a little bit more in the story? Would you like to have seen one of these characters potentially have been not killed and came back in a sequel? Like, what character interests you that you would have liked to have seen more of?
Okay, the one that actually interested me the most had to be Tintin from both the comic and the movie. I just liked his character the entire time. He just seemed to be like the wild card of the whole T-Bird gang. The one that just pretty much was like a loose cannon. Because we forget, he almost wanted to kill Gideon, like in the first couple minutes of him meeting him, all because he like sold him a purse at a lower price. So I would like to have seen him more.
Which is so weird because he's the one who actually kind of puts up a fight against the Crow, more so than some of the other ones does, but he's the first one taken out.
Yeah, and it's such a shame because he has like the most skill out of them because he doesn't need a gun. He has his knives.
No, yeah, he has the knives. Yeah, it's definitely it was an interesting take to make a character like that and then have him be the first one killed off. I thought that was interesting.
Like there was a missed opportunity, I feel like, with him to really like show off some of Brandon Lee's like skills, choreographed skills. Yeah. That would have been a great scene to like see that unfold. It would have been a great opening to see like, Eric Draven, he's a full on, man back from the dead. He's on a mission.
All right, so who did you not? Who could you have done without?
I really don't want the Skank character to come back. I really, really don't. He's just there for like comedic relief, and he's just the typecast, like, okay, boss, like the dope character that we see like in all the cliche gangsters and all that stuff. Like, there's always a dim-witted one, and I don't want to see that again.
Yeah, but he gets one of the more elaborate deaths. So
that is true. He does, but I don't know. Don't make him the dimwit of the group. Make him, I don't know, something else. Like break the mold for a bit.
Yeah. I'm probably going to have to agree with you on 1010. I would have liked to have seen the 1010 character do a little bit more. I honestly would also say I would have liked, even though Brandon Lee was not able to do the sequels, and I know the sequels aren't great. We won't talk about that. But I would have liked for Albrecht to have kind of been a connecting piece as the franchise moved on, and for Albrecht to have appeared in some of the other ones. I know that once they got like kind of more low budget and more like straight to video, Ernie Hudson was probably out of the pay range for them to do it. But yeah,
life moves pretty fast.
1010 would probably
if you
be
don't
one,
stop
and
and listen to the
I've
80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it.
Bailing's character.
Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels, and we're going to kick things off talking about the death of Eric and Shelley. So, you know what happens in the movie. They break in, and they kill them. In the comic, it is actually more of a random killing. Eric and Shelley had gone out on a date, and on their way back, their car breaks down. Eric is on the side of the road trying to fix the car. Shelley's inside the car, and the gang just pull up and start harassing them. And I will say this, everyone is involved in this death. In the movie, Top Dollar, who is the main bad guy, is not actually involved in their murder. He is involved in them being murdered, but he's not involved in their murder. In the comic book, every single one of them has something to do with Eric and Shelley's murder. But what happens is Eric is shot in the head, like just straight up, just shot in the head, doesn't die immediately. And it's T-Bird in the comic who is the main one. So he's the one who shoots Eric. Eric does not die immediately. He shoots Eric again. Eric actually becomes like paralyzed. And so he's still alive as he watches them pull Shelley from the car and then start beating her. They do rape her, and then they shoot her in the head. And Eric sees the whole thing. You've got a similar moment like you do in the movie of Shelley yelling, Eric, Eric, and there's nothing he can do.
In the comics, it's harder to listen to, though.
Yeah. They are left to die. Eric is found alive and taken to the hospital, but he succumbs to his injuries at the hospital. Shelley is announced dead at the scene. And of course, that is a complete flip-flop of what they do in the movie, where Eric dies at the scene, getting thrown out the window. Eric dies at the scene, and Shelley is found alive and taken to the hospital. So it's a little bit of a flip there. So what did you think about the way they did the death in the movie?
Again, this goes back to the stakes were raised a little bit more. It felt personal this time versus, just a random event. Don't get me wrong, I did like how it was just a random event because sometimes bad things just happen, and I liked how that comic captured. However, in the movie, I did like how it was about them wanting to take out everybody that didn't want to relocate the apartment, and they were the ones that didn't want to, therefore they were targeted, and it was organized.
I will say I don't think they make that as clear as they could have in the movie. You kind of have to listen to some of the
flashbacks.
And some of the side dialogue to understand that what has happened in the movie is that Top Dollar, for some reason, is trying to own these buildings, and Shelley is actually trying to get a petition and fight against him getting control. And so Top Dollar sends the thugs to attack Shelley. Eric then arrives as they're doing it, and then that leads to their death. But yeah, in the comic, they are just
wrong place, wrong time.
And the gang members, they're high on drugs, and they think it's fun to do what they do. I will also point this out. In the comic book, Eric and Shelley do not live really kind of in the city, like in this loft. They live in like a suburban home in the comic book.
A very nice suburban home, mind you.
Yes.
Like even it's not even like colored that much on like how much furniture is really in the apartment, which is kind of disappointing.
Yeah, because the movie makes it look like, they are struggling, he's a struggling musician. She's struggling. The apartments, they make it their own, but it's not real nice. Whereas, in the movie, in the comic book, they look like they are building a very nice life for themselves out in the suburbs. And, they show them painting and doing all this stuff to make their home for when they get married.
Yep.
And, it does look like a nice little home. Let's move on to the next part, the pawn shop. So in the comic book, Gideon is actually killed by the Crow. He stabs him in the hand, then proceeds to go after stuff. Then Gideon gets the knife out of his hand, goes to draw his gun, and the Crow just takes him out he just unloads on him and kills him. He does still blow up the pawn shop with Gideon's dead body inside. And that's how that happens. So Gideon getting away and then going to tell Top Dollar. Nope, Gideon dies immediately.
Yeah, to be honest, I like both the scenes, even though if I was going to be a little biased, I love the movie version so much more, just because of the dialogue between them. It's not copy-paste exactly, but it's just, when I was going back and reading the comic, I could just hear the actor's voice in there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say, is that gasoline I smell? And I'm like, he doesn't say that in the comics. He talks about kerosene, but he's not talking to Gideon at that time. So I will admit, I do like how the movie handled it more, because that way Gideon kind of gets set on fire and kind of gets... Because the man's a crooked man. He helps ruin lives. Yeah.
But he in the comic, he's saying that to Albrecht, because the pawn shop doesn't blow up until he walks away and Albrecht's standing there. And then it blows up while he's, I think, on the phone with. So let's get into, as I talked about earlier, let's talk about the deaths. So the deaths happen in a completely different order, in a completely different manner in the comic versus the movie. Like, you cannot pick up the comic and follow the movie in the same pattern. So, but I did want to talk about and compare the death scenes. So 1010 in the comic book is just shot in the head. That's it. Eric puts the gun underneath his chin and just blows his brains out. That's it. That's all.
Boring. Very boring.
Yeah.
Anticlimactic.
Yeah, of course, in the movie, we get the knife fight and the Crow catching the knife and all that. So a little bit more interesting. Top Dollar, but like I said, Top Dollar is just a regular gang member in the comic. He's killed with several other bad guys that are with him. The Crow takes all of them out. The Crow shoots Top Dollar in the head. Top Dollar actually survives that shot. The Crow talks to him for a little bit more, and then the Crow just blows him away again. So he just shoots him. That's it. Top Dollar's just shot to death. Whereas, of course, Top Dollar in the comic book is the main bad guy, so he gets a little bit more of an elaborate death, where pretty much the Crow drives him crazy and causes him to
feel the pain.
Feel the pain, and that leads to his death. So again, a little bit more elaborate in the movie than it is in the comic. Moving on, Skank. Now, I gotta tell you, Skank gets two really good deaths.
Yes.
So in the comic book, Skank is decapitated. It's one of those scenes where he and Tom Tom are standing side by side. They have just murdered a dude. And while they're just standing there talking while they're watching this guy bleed to death that they just killed, a noose somehow gets around Skank's neck without him knowing. And then his head just pops off.
Disappears next panel.
Yeah, just disappears. And there's, of course, even a joke where Tom Tom said something about, it's not something to lose your head over or something. And he doesn't even realize that Skank is dead at the time. Yeah, not sure how the Crow got the noose around his neck, but it makes for a funny couple of panels. So which one did you like better, the movie or the comic for Skank?
I have to say I like the comic book more, just because it's so comedic. Because he's like,
it's comedic,
it's dark,
it's brutal. Yeah, it's brutal. I think it would have been funny to have thrown that in. And then Tom Tom, who, like I said, was with Skank, he then, of course, turns and sees what has happened. The Crow then slashes with a sword at Tom Tom's legs and cuts his legs off, right about at the top of his boots. So his feet are just sitting there, and he falls back with his legs cut off. He then has a whole conversation with the Crow where he reveals some information to the Crow as he then slowly bleeds to death. And there's even, I think at the end of the conversation, he even says, can I go to sleep now?
Yeah.
And so again, I like Tom Tom's. Tom Tom's not in the movie, to my knowledge.
No, I think it was because of too many T's. I think that might have been the problem.
Yeah, I did not remember a character being named Tom Tom, so there is no Tom Tom. But again, I like that death. Yes, it may have been a little bit too graphic for a movie, but I liked it.
There was too many gunshots, and you have to get a little more creative because that's all Eric Draven's going to do. Everyone's going to get bored really fast and be like, he's just going to shoot him. So I applaud it for the comic book going a different direction.
Yeah, the very first appearance of the Crow was on the back page of another comic, and it is the Crow standing holding a samurai sword in one hand and a shotgun in the other. And that's what, he doesn't just shoot, he's got this sword. And so we got to see that. Fun Boy, as we talked about a little bit earlier, Fun Boy, there's some similarity in what happens here. He is caught in bed with Sherry's mom in the comic, just like he is in the movie. But in the comic book, when the Crow arrives, he gives Sherry some very poetic words, and then he just tells her to leave. And he says he has some friends that will lead her to Sherry. And it's just this herd of cats. I didn't understand why there's a herd of cats to lead Sherry's mom to Sherry.
He's a cat whisperer.
But yeah, but that's all there is with Sherry. There isn't the where she's there for pretty much the whole thing, and then he talks to her and removes the morphine from her body, which we're going to get into his powers in a minute. He just tells her to leave, and she leaves. The Crow then tells Fun Boy in the comic, hey, I want you to meet me at a bar, and I want you to bring some friends. And then he just lets Fun Boy go. He does steal his morphine.
Like 2 vials, I think.
Yeah, and destroys, I think, the rest. And then he meets up with Fun Boy and his group of thugs at this bar. He takes the first guy out with an axe. Had an axe. Takes the first guy out with an axe. He then just shoots a bunch of the rest of them. But he still lets Fun Boy live. And this time it's because he wants Fun Boy to deliver a message to T-Bird. Again, remember T-Bird's the main villain of the comic. And then after he delivers the message to T-Bird, Fun Boy goes into another room in order to get high. The Crow shows up, speaks with him, and Fun Boy ends up in that conversation ODing on the drug he has taken. And that was the end of Fun Boy. So we've kind of already talked. You kind of wanted to see Fun Boy played out a little bit more. Whereas in the comic, Crow just takes him out right then and there.
Yeah, and even in the movie, there was a deleted scene because if you notice, at one point, Eric has like a gash on the back of his leather jacket. That was Fun Boy coming back after he kind of like lost consciousness after Eric made him shoot himself in the leg.
Yeah. Well, there's some inconsistency with Fun Boy too, because they have the battle in the bedroom, and then Eric takes him and puts him in the shower and then turns the water on. But then we see him later, we see Fun Boy laying there and he's got a bunch of needles in him. And like, when did that happen? Like, to me, there was some inconsistency in what they did with Fun Boy in the movie.
They should have kept that. Movie. They should have kept that deleted scene in because it would have given a little bit more context on that Fun Boy kind of regained consciousness and went after him with the razor blade.
Yeah. There's another character called Ugly Patrick in the comic book. This is a guy who simply Eric just walks up to and then slashes his throat.
Yep.
And that's it. That's all there is. Again, several other gang members that the Crow just takes out by shooting. He then confronts T-Bird at the end. T-Bird releases a bunch of guys and escapes to his car, and there's this dude named Shelby who's in the passenger seat. The Crow then shoots Shelby in the head, and taking off the top half of his head, Shelby then is just sitting in the car with half of his head gone. And what's funny is T-Bird still like talks to him, even though he knows he's dead. He still talks to Shelly, which was so weird.
It's kind of like what we saw with Tom Tom and everyone. It was just kind of like, let's add this scene again. But
yeah, but Tom Tom didn't know. Yeah, Tom Tom didn't know when he was still.
It just seemed odd, though.
The Skank was dead. Yeah, but here, because he even says like, "Oh, you're starting to stink, Shelby." Like,
yeah, that badly already. How long have y'all been in the car?
Well, but again, he does get out, and he gets his men to attack the Crow. The Crow actually puts down his guns and actually takes out a couple of these guys barehanded. But then he starts using the weapons the guys have, like, does the action thing where he makes a guy shoot another guy and stuff like that. T-Bird then gets back into the car. This is that bit we were just talking about where he talks to the beheaded Shelby, and he starts to drive away. The Crow then finishes killing everybody, which I love. There's a joke here, which I really wish they had put in the movie, but I understand why they didn't. The Crow kills everybody. There's a police car that pulls up. The Crow's just standing there, and there are 2 cops in the car, and one says, "Do you see that?" And the other cop says, "Yes, I see it, and you just keep on driving."
Yeah, that was pretty good. I will admit they do make the cops a lot more dim-witted and useless. So I kind of like, again, I like how they made Ernie Hudson's character a little bit more useful, whereas in the comic book they're all useless. They're just all dim-witted cops.
Yeah, they pretty much just, the cops are a side note, whereas in the movie they make it where Eric is actually having to hide from the cops. Like, the cops are actually pursuing him. So I understand why you couldn't have a scene like this, because you're putting that aspect into the movie. But then the Crow gets into a car and follows suit and chases down T-Bird. It is actually the crow, the bird, that then flies in front of T-Bird, right there on the windshield to block his view, causing T-Bird to crash. T-Bird then climbs out of the crash, but talks about how his legs are broken, and he just flops down right there on the car. The crow then walks up, and all we get is a panel of T-Bird sitting there, and then the crow reveals that he is holding a claw hammer. And that's all we get. We do not actually see T-Bird's death in the comic. We just find out what happened on the very next page when the crow, the bird, talks about how he beat him to death with a with a claw hammer. By the way, I don't think I've mentioned that. In the comic book, the crow talks. I didn't mention that, but yes, the crow talks.
Very odd. But at the same time, I understand why. Because it's his guide. So it does make sense for him to kind of have that conscience and all that, I guess.
Yeah, but in the comic, they even make it so that Shelley actually heard the crow talk as she was dying. What did you think about the finales of both of these? So the finale of the movie with Top Dollar and the way it all ends, and then the finale here with T-Bird. I'm not talking about Eric's ending. I'm talking about the ending of his vengeance. Defeating his final bad guy.
I will say, again, this just goes back to how the comic was. I think it was just, they wanted to show as much of the vengeance as they could, but it was just very anticlimactic with just how he went about it. Doesn't mean it was bad, it's just that after you see the movie, you just have a whole different mindset for it. So I will say I liked the vengeance ending for the movie more than I did with the comic ending, especially with T-Bird, because T-Bird, in the movie, he got it the worst, because he was the only one that kind of got the realization on he has come back from the dead to take all of us out, and he's just kind of got that last moment when he says that line over and over to know this is what this means, and I'm going to die next.
And then, do you like that, him falling to his death, and do you like that over?
Oh, yes, so much more, because, again, it's just one of those, I guess, just deaths for the villain and all that stuff, because he's, saying, victory speech and all that, and then that's when he gives him all the pain, and then he kind of just dies the way he does, in a very gruesome way. That's the most gruesome death, I will admit, in the movie that you would see in the comic book, surprisingly.
Okay, let's get into the Crow as a superhero. So he is a superhero. The movie makes him a little bit more of a superhero in certain ways. So in the comic book, I will say though, he is pretty much invincible. Nothing slows him down, nothing stops him in the comic book. When they shoot him, there's not even where he falls back or he barely reacts when he is shot in the comic book. I do like that the movie does give him moments where he isn't, unstoppable. I mean, right off the bat, the fight with 1010, 1010 does get the upper hand a couple of times. So I did like that. I do like that when he does get shot, it does kind of knock him back. But then they give him the healing factor. Now again, he's undead, so you expect some of that. But in the movie, they really treat it like Wolverine type healing factor. You shoot him and then you see the wound close up. He gets cut and you see the wound close up. That's not in the comic. The comic, if he's shot, he's just shot, and then he just keeps going. I don't even think there's any blood that comes out of the Crow.
No,
in the comic,
there really isn't. You just kind of see the splatter, I want to say, but that's more.
Yeah, and you see the hole. Yeah, and you see the. Now, I will say that for those who don't know, the comic is entirely black and white. So, but yeah, he gets shot, and you see the holes, but that's about it. Then there's the moment in the movie where he draws the morphine out of Sherry's mom, Darla. Nice little effect there, where you see it ooze out of the veins, the needle. You see it ooze out, and of course she becomes a little bit more clear-headed. He pretty much removes her high, the effects of the drugs on her. So they do that. Again, they didn't do that in the comic book. He just tells her to go, and she goes. So, okay, they gave him that power. Makes it make a little bit more sense when you then see the scene of her making breakfast for Sherry. Makes that a little bit better. Because in the comic book, he actually asks Albright, take care of Sherry. Again, I know it's Sarah in the movie, but take care of Sherry. And so you don't really get that conclusion of the mom, being a better mom for her in the comic. And then, of course, the big thing we just talked about, being able to transfer the pain into another person as he does with Top Dollar. That's not something he does in the comic book at all. So they do give him more powers in the movie. In the comic book, he's
vengeance.
He's just vengeance. He is just an undead killing machine, and that's all there is to it. So what did you think about making him more of a quote-unquote superhero?
I did like that more because, again, it made him more interesting as a superhero, other than just the fact, like, you shoot me, I can just keep going, versus you see the effects. Gideon shoots him first, which shows us the wound being healed, but my favorite has to be when Funboy shoots him, because that just shows his whole hand being put back. Him helping out Darla to make her a better mother, versus just, him just saying that quote and then just walking away and saying, "Here are my spirit cats, follow them." And then
which he does give her the kind of the poetic speech in the movie as well, where he talks about how, mother is another word for God or something like that.
Mother is the word of God on the lips of little children, I think.
Yeah, something like that. So, all right, what did you think of, because this is something that's not in the comics, what did you think of making the crow the source of his powers, like the bird?
I really didn't like that. I understand why they wanted to put it in there for realism, I will say, in quotation marks.
You got to give it. You got to give a superhero their kryptonite.
Absolutely, and I'm totally fine with that. It was just odd that this bird that follows him everywhere would be his weakness, and I was like, why would the bird knowingly go to a fight where there's gunfire instead of just like, here, I'm gonna hang out outside the church while you finish real quick, just to be on the safe side in case I get hit with something.
Yeah. I like it though. I like that there is that connection, that you the crow being the source of his power. So you take out the crow, then he becomes mortal for the most part. So I kind of like that, but I see your point on that too. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Final decision: bag it, stack it, or trade it. James, what say you?
I'm gonna bag it. I love the graphic novel, and I love the movie. They're very different, but they both tell a really great, compelling story of just the battle of good and evil, love, and just good old fashioned vengeance.
Yeah, I can agree with a bag it. I'm gonna have to go stack it though. I don't think the movie's good enough to make a bag it. It's a cult classic. I mean, this is a cult favorite, but I think if you're going to be considered a cult favorite, I don't think you hit bag it status, in my opinion.
Fair enough.
Yes, this is a story, both the comic and the movie. It's a story about grief. It's a story about loss. The comic book tells it a little differently than the movie. The comic book, the crow is the personification of grief. And again, he's just this unstoppable force that's going to wreak havoc until he runs his course, which is exactly what grief does. Whereas in the movie, the crow uses his grief as the motivation for his vengeance and shows that Eric will not rest until he completes his task. Whereas, like I said, in the comic book, it's that he's going to finish. Like, there's no doubt he's going to finish. Whereas in the movie, we do have that doubt because they kill the crow. Eric then realizes it's all done, goes to Shelley's grave. He's ready to just be done. But then, of course, when they kidnap Sarah, he realizes, no, he can't rest until his mission is over. So they do tell the stories a little bit differently. I think this movie gets a bad rep, and I partly think that's more because of the sequels. This one it's good. This crow is good. And I wish more people would see that. I do.
Yeah, I have to agree as well. All the way up to what you're saying right now. I understand why they wanted to put Sherry in there to kind of make it about like, vengeance has its costs with what you do with your actions of vengeance. People sometimes get hurt around you. And it does get a bad rep because, unfortunately, I have also seen City of Angels, all that stuff, and they're you can't compare them. You really can't. It's just, there's a change in everything. The tone, camera work, editing, good lord, the editing, just everything.
Yeah, the budget definitely and the production value definitely went down with the sequels, and this one's not a, huge movie, but it tells a really compelling story. Brandon Lee is amazing in this. It's so sad, the tragic accident that happened, but he is amazing in this role. To me, this role is so connected to Brandon Lee that, like I said, none of the other actors who played the Crow in the other sequels held a candle to Brandon Lee. And I'm very curious to see now with this remake coming out how Bill Skarsgård does with this role.
Same here. I've heard some stuff already, but I'm trying to move it out of my headspace and just away from the internet, because the internet's a weird place now with movies. So I'm like, I'm going to go see it and I'm going to make my own decision.
Yeah, and that's what I think everybody should do. So if you haven't seen The Crow in a while, or you never saw it because you always heard bad things about it, I say go see it. Make a decision for yourself. You might consider to trade it, and that's fine. That's your opinion, and you are welcome to that. Again, James saw it as a bag it. I see it as a stack it. So, hey, there's a spectrum there. All right, but thanks. We're going to wrap things up. Thank you, James, for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome, and always enjoy talking, especially these kind of horror-related comics and stuff with you.
I'm down for it.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Rate and review the show. Before today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.